When it comes to continuous glucose monitors, MARD is considered to be the go-to measurement for accuracy. It stands for Mean Average Relative Difference and measures the deviation of CGM readings compared to reference blood glucose values during clinical trials. But get this, there is no universal standard for how a company measures the MARD of a CGM, and it's possible to manipulate trials to produce better results. Welcome to the show. I'm Justin. I have type 1 diabetes, and on here I talk all things diabetes tech, news, and management with physicians, tech leaders, and those thriving with diabetes and using the tech themselves. Joining me today to talk about MARD and how it's measured is Tim Street, the founder and writer of Diabettech, but with two T's. He is my Diabettech counterpart across the pond in the UK. Tim has type 1 diabetes and has written about diabetes tech for nearly a decade, and specifically has written many articles on his blog about MARD and how it's not as straightforward as you may think. We get into the many variables companies control in an accuracy trial, specific CGMs and how the MARD may have been calculated, and whether or not a universal standard of calculation will be put forth. What do you think about all of this? Let us know in the comments on YouTube. And a big announcement, we now have a newsletter. To stay up to date on all of the latest in diabetes tech news and innovations and Diabettech content releases across social and YouTube, you can subscribe with the link in the show notes. Keep in mind that anything you hear on this podcast or any of my content is not medical advice and is for educational purposes only. Always consult with a physician before making changes to your healthcare. Tim, welcome to the show, my Diabettech counterpart. How are you doing?
I'm very good, thank you, Justin.
I'm so glad you're here. You write great stuff. Tell us a little bit. How long have you been blogging in the diabetes space?
Since Libre 1 came out, so going back to nearly 10 years now, when I first got involved, when I was the victim of circumstance, you could say. I received 2 Libres and 2 readers because one of the old readers broke. And I thought, oh no, I'll put both the sensors on and see what happens. And if you go back to that really early stuff, it was like I had 2 Libre 1 sensors and massive gap between the readings in parallel with each other. It's like, oh, okay, these things aren't quite as replicable sensor to sensor as I thought. And that's kind of where I started writing about diabetes stuff.
When did the Libre 1 come out?
October 2014 in Europe.
Okay.
When they launched it as a trial base of an early adopter trial based thing for people to buy. And the key thing about that was that compared to the Dexcom devices that were around at the time, it cost about 1/10 of the price to get a form of CGM that you simply couldn't get anywhere near the price anywhere else.
Okay. So you've been using and writing about CGMs for a very long time. MARD, right? That's something we're going to be talking about a lot today. That is the accuracy determination for these devices. It's a lot of what we all go by when we're like, oh, it has a great MARD or a better MARD than this CGM. Can you explain to all of us what does MARD stand for and what is it exactly?
It's mean absolute relative deviation, and essentially what you do is you take your subjects of your clinical trial into a hospital or a clinic or a lab, and over the course of a day, you hook them up to a venous blood withdrawal system, and every 15 or 30 minutes, you withdraw blood from the veins, which you then run through what's called a YSI analyzer. YSI stands for Yellow Springs Instruments, and that gives you a glucose content of the venous blood. And what you do is you then take a reading close in time to that blood sample. In theory, at least, you take one that occurs sort of 5 to 10 minutes after that, and then compare the 2 readings with each other. Say, right, this is venous, this is the CGM reading. Capture all of those, and then it's the, if you like, an average percentage of the difference between the blood readings and the CGM readings, which gives you a MARD number.
Okay, and when it comes to the MARD numbers, the lower the percentage is, the better the accuracy.
The closer the bloods are to the CGM values, the better the accuracy of the device is.
Okay. Now, over the last 2 years, you've written at least 3 blog posts that all kind of cover how trials for CGM accuracy are run and what that looks like. What led you on this investigation looking into all of this?
So within Europe, we have a different regime in relation to getting products to market compared to the US. In the US, you have to get FDA approval for medical devices to be brought to market. And to do that, you have to submit your devices to the FDA, who put them under a high level of scrutiny. In Europe, they've got a process called a CE mark. And all the CE mark is really doing is saying that what you're doing is meeting the requirements to allow marketing of your product to the general public. It doesn't have the same level of scrutiny that the FDA gives to CGM devices. Local regulators are then supposed to approve, but generally, if it's got a CE mark, then it's generally perceived to be okay, and that's based on the class of medical device it is. What we've seen as a result of that is a relatively high number of new entrant devices coming into the European market, all of which have made claims as to having a high level of accuracy, i.e. a low MARD number, to compete with the market standards, which are obviously those from Dexcom and those from Abbott. And what I've found, and what many others have found, is that the performance hasn't necessarily been as good when we've put them on ourselves as we would like. And then when you start to look at the publications associated with how they've arrived at this MARD number, you kind of go, oh, that's interesting. That's really not all that good. And the question is, why? And that's when you start to look at the background and how these things are what I like to call doping the trial.
Yeah, and I want to get into all of that. You explain a lot of it in your posts. Before we kind of hop into that, though, I do want to understand a little bit more about MARD. And I think it's good context for kind of where we're going with this conversation. Is there a universal standard for how MARD is calculated for CGMs? And why isn't there if there's not, right? It feels like it would only make sense for there to be.
It's an interesting one, right? MARD is a standard mechanism for mechanically generating a number. And it's a statistical model that everybody uses, and it works the same way. But what there isn't is a set of standards around how you gather the data and the processes you go through in that data gathering to ensure that every process does the same steps and therefore is using the same method to create that data. And that's really where the differences come to the fore when you review some of these trials.
How long has MARD been around? Is it something that was being used for like blood glucose meter tests, or is this like a CGM measurement?
It's tended to be used as a CGM much more readily than it has been used in fingerstick testing. But it's a statistical measure that's been around for a long time, so it's not a new thing.
Today's episode is sponsored by T1D Exchange. You can directly make an impact on diabetes healthcare, treatments, and technology by participating in the T1D Exchange registry. It starts with a simple survey about your life with T1D, and it only takes about 15 minutes. After that, you'll have a personal portal with ongoing T1D study and survey opportunities. Plus, some of these studies even offer compensation. Signing up with the link in the show notes helps support my channel, and it allows me to continue putting out free content. You can sign up at t1dexchange.org/Diabettech or click that link in today's show notes. So one of your posts, I believe the first one in the series, it's called Lies, Damned Lies and Statistics, the Art of the CGM Accuracy Study. Fascinating post, very well researched. And in this article, you list out a few different CGMs and kind of their trials. You put in the Dexcom G6, the Libre 14-day, the Medtrum, the iDex, which I don't even know myself. This was 2 years ago you wrote this. What were some of the differences you noticed between these studies?
So I think the key thing is to take a step back and look at the points that I made in that study, so in that article. And I think one of the key points about it is that there are a number of factors that you have to take into account when you're doing an accuracy study. And by skewing some of those, you can end up in quite an interesting place. So first of all, the number of participants you have to start off with, because the more participants, the wider range of people you will have taking part, and therefore the less skewed it is by any particular population within your study. Then you have the type of participants in the study. So, for example, if you have a high population of people who maybe don't have hypoglycemia, then you're less likely to have a wider difference from the blood levels, because there is a well-known feature of CGM is that as you get below around about 80 milligrams per deciliter, you start to get higher variation when you have less glucose for the substrates on the sensors to actually detect. So they tend to be less accurate at lower levels. If you have less variation in the glucose levels throughout the course of the study you're undertaking, then generally you end up with a much tighter profile and therefore less variation. And if you've got less variation, then your MARD comes down. And one of the other things that we've seen from some of the new entrant CGMs is a higher proportion of people with type 2 than type 1. Again, that's linked to variation in glucose levels.
Yeah, there are so many variables. I'm sure more than you even just said. And it boggles my mind that all CGMs aren't held to the same variables to understand how they all perform in certain ways. Quote from your article kind of sums it really well. I'll just read it. You mentioned this in the section called lower glucose variability. You kind of got into this, but you say at a very basic level, when glucose levels are rising or falling rapidly, the interstitial fluid glucose concentrations tend to lag in the venous levels more significantly than during periods of stable glucose levels, right?
Mm-hmm.
So does this mean that when companies are working on CGM tests that they're going to try and put people in with the lowest variability of glucose fluctuations, like more people with type 2 diabetes than type 1 diabetes?
Well, I couldn't possibly state whether or not they do it deliberately, but if you look at some of the studies out there for some of the new entrants, they appear to take that approach to the populations that are involved.
Where does the FDA approval or CE mark come in after these studies are done? What do they want to see from this, right? Like, what is their involvement exactly?
So they're the ones who give the authority or have the authority to give the approval for marketing the devices. So in the case of the CE mark, I haven't seen the requirements, but as far as I can tell, there's a set of standards you have to live up to in terms of support and the processes you go through. I'm not clear on the level of detail they go into in terms of the verifiable accuracy of the data, and I'm pretty sure they don't look at the study data that we've seen related to some of these devices as to whether that is accurate or not. All they're doing is saying, yes, what you've presented with us is good enough to be marketed. The FDA, from what I see, goes into more detail around the data that's presented and the verifiability of that data and whether it actually meets the rules associated with it. But I don't know the details of the FDA processes, because obviously I don't sit in the US, so I haven't dug into that to the same level of detail. But the FDA is definitely more rigorous in its approach to these things.
Okay. Another one of your posts was aimed more, it was a continuation of your original. It was aimed more at the Libre 3 sensor. This is a couple years ago when it received clearance, in that you say that the Libre 2 and the Dexcom G7 sensors accuracy was done with the gold standard techniques, and they had similar approaches and outcomes. What did you mean by that?
So in both of those cases, the companies themselves undertook that process for driving a MARD number out. And when they did it, they included a process of glucose challenge in the lab or clinic, where they brought people down to hypo levels, and then they had a percentage of the process was done at hypo level and then brought back up again. So they were able to say, I'm going to say numbers off the top of my head. I've heard as hearsay that it's something, I believe it's something like 8% of the numbers were in the hypo range, and then they were also taken up high and brought back down again as well. So essentially, the glucose levels are being manipulated in the lab, and then the venous samples are being tested against the CGM as they go through that glucose challenge process. And that's what I considered as like a gold standard for this process. When they launched the Libre 3, rather than doing glucose challenges, they went, if people are low at the time, great, but if they're not, fine. So and in theory, at least, the population would be up and down as normal on a day-to-day basis. But if we take the assumption that normal users meet the time in range sort of standard of being less than 4% below range on an average day, maybe 2 or 3%, then the number of data points that are very low or low will be lower than they would have been in those other tests. That would then suggest that the overall MARD number would be lower because you'd have fewer points in that low range where the variability is higher, essentially. And that's kind of what I meant by not applying the same gold standard. So it's an interesting way of doing it. It's not wrong, again, as we said, there is no standard, but if you don't have as many points low, then the likelihood is that your MARD number is going to be better than it would be with the higher number of low points.
Yeah, is what you're talking about with the Libre 3 a lack of glucose data manipulation?
Yes.
Okay, yeah. So I read that in your article. You had pointed out that Camille of Diabettech reported that in one of his YouTube videos. By the way, I'm linking all of this stuff in the show notes so people can read and watch all of this. But when it comes to the Libre 3 technology and Libre 2 technology, what I believe I was getting from all of the research I've done to get to this interview was that, is it true that the technology behind those two sensors are essentially the same besides the size of the CGM? Which, before you answer that, then it would be, the MARDs are different. The MARD of the Libre 2 is what, 8.9%, and the Libre 3 is 7.9% without that manipulated glucose data. Is what I'm saying correct, or correct me if I'm wrong?
That's my understanding. I believe that the sensor technology is the same across the two. I don't know whether there are differences to the algorithm. Obviously, only Abbott can tell us that. But I believe there was some surprise that the Libre 3 was so much better than the Libre 2. And I'm led to believe that's because the underlying technologies are actually basically the same thing. Again, Abbott would be able to answer that completely. But from what we understand, there's not a lot of difference between the two.
Okay. In your most recent article, it covers this head-to-head study that put the Libre 3 versus the Dexcom G7. It was published by the Journal of Diabetes Science and Technology earlier this year. What did the study determine?
Honestly, not a lot. So the study was done by Abbott to prove that the Libre 3 was better than the Dexcom G7. But there are a lot of problems with the study. Abbott were very happy at ATTD to talk about how they had the best sensor and how it was better than the G7. That this study proved it. Unfortunately, the study was funded by Abbott, designed by Abbott. The editor who helped write it up was hired by Abbott. And yet, if you look at the top of the page on it, it doesn't really tell you that actually this is a very Abbott-centric study. And then when you start to dig into some of the techniques used and how they timed the comparison of the data points, you start to see that the study design is designed to work better with the Libre 3 than it is with the Dexcom G7. So whilst the study proclaimed that the G7 wasn't as good as the Libre 3 and that the article was therefore being published by the JDST because actually there were no other head-to-heads at the time, ultimately it's not a very reliable way of making a conclusion out of which of these two is the best device, because it's a very skewed, and one might even argue biased towards the Libre 3 by virtue of the design of the study and the funding and setup of the whole thing. So you kind of have to draw the conclusion that it's not really a very good study in that respect. It wasn't actually a clinical trial. It was described as some sort of research study and therefore was never registered as a clinical trial and in theory didn't have to be. And then there's the question about sensor lag, because if you look at the timing of the data points, if you do a venous test and then pull, I think they talked about they did it as the first point prior to the venous data test. Now, if you're on a Libre 3, that's a minute prior. If you're on a maximum of a minute prior, if you're on a G7, that could be 4.5 minutes prior. So the most recent data point, or the closest data point, sorry, is not necessarily a good measure given the different ways the two devices measure the data and the timing of the device data measurement.
What about your personal experience with these devices? Have you used both the Libre 3 and the G7, and have you done any reporting on that?
I have. There is an article. It was quite good fun to do, and it was called The Battle Royale, where I put the G7, the G6, and the Libre 3 up against each other. And what I found quite interesting on that actually was that for me, the G6 in that particular one was a 13.6 versus finger pricks. The G7 was 11.4% versus finger pricks, and the Libre 3 was 7.2% versus finger pricks. So it was quite different, and it would seem to align with the study that was presented by Abbott, but the methods are slightly different in that when I did it versus using my standard approach for doing these things.
Interesting. So you wore the three of them, and then Libre 3, because it was the lowest percent off, right? That was the winner in your testing.
In my personal test against it, yeah. And what was quite interesting was that actually both the G6 and the Libre 3 incorrectly measured hypos, a third of the hypo measures that they did, whereas the G7 didn't give any incorrect hypos. So there is definitely some variation between the sensors, especially even when I tested them on myself.
Yeah, and now there's the Libre 2 Plus, the Libre 3 Plus just got announced. Yeah. Are there differences with these CGMs in order, because their iCGM clearance designation, they can work with closed loop. Were there differences made in these CGMs to make them work better with pumps? Yeah,
so the Libre 2 and Libre 3 had reported problems with vitamin C. And both of those, when you look at the safety considerations on the Abbott website, talk about having problems with 500 milligrams of vitamin C and potentially giving high readings in response to that, where the Libre 3 Plus and 2 Plus, that goes up to 1,000 milligrams. Now, I did personally do a quick test with the Libre 2 versus the Libre 2 Plus to see what happened with vitamin C. It turned out to have no difference within my body. So that may be something that's only applicable to certain people in certain circumstances, but it's happened enough for the FDA to have concerns, and so they only made it ICGM at the Libre 2 and Libre 3 level for one of the for the non-AID version, whereas the Libre 3 Plus and Libre 2 Plus, they've made it available for AID. What I assume that means is that Abbott have either modified the sensor slightly or they've modified the algorithm slightly, but I don't know the detail of it.
So would you agree that none of these companies that are producing CGMs and coming up with these MARD, they're not doing anything wrong? There is no regulation, right? They're just obviously they're a company. They're gonna do it in the way that makes them look best. But
yeah,
there's
exactly that. There are no rules in this area, and that's one of the reasons why people have talked about it being the wild, wild west. There is no, this is how you arrive at a MARD number or a CGM. There are no guidelines. There's no rules. There's no set in sand set of data you have to produce. There's no method you have to follow. Some people have chosen to do it a certain way because they might believe that that method is perhaps more rigorous than that which others have used, but nobody's actually doing anything wrong in the choices that they've made to arrive at a better MARD number than others have.
MARD has always, since I entered this world, it's always been a marker for me of, this one has the best accuracy. It must be the best in its category. Obviously, there's so much more to it. How do you think consumers can make an informed decision about the CGM they should use? It sounds like they can't necessarily rely on MARD alone.
No, they can't. If you're going to look at MARD, you need to understand how MARD has been arrived at. That's fundamentally the basis of it. You're actually better off looking at the ICGM data if it's available. So that's the 15/15/2020 data, because that gives you a better idea of whether the device you're looking at is actually good at giving CGM data. Basically, if you look at the 2020 data for the Libre 3, the G7 and the G6, when I used that on myself, the 2020 data for the Libre 3 was 3.8% of values fell outside that range. The G7 was 12.8% fell outside. The published data gives you that kind of information as well. And essentially what you're looking at with the ICGM characteristics is not just a MARD number, it's also when the numbers are lower and when the proximity of the numbers to the actual reference data, how close is it and how frequently do those numbers actually fall within that number. So you're either talking about falling outside or falling inside. The key thing is to understand what you're looking at and then to follow that through. But the ICGM mechanism is actually a very good one for doing that.
So is there any work being done to create a universal, streamlined process for how all of these companies can come to this accuracy number of this MARD so that all of them are on par?
So there have been proposals put forward by the IFCC to standardize that process. I believe that recently they did publish something to say, this is what we would like to see. I haven't seen anything official yet that says, yes, this is the way it's going to work and what's going to happen. But yes, the IFCC has been very vehemently putting forward an approach to say it needs to change. The differences across the approaches used by the different companies doesn't make sense, and we need a better way of doing this.
Yeah. Tim, thank you so much for coming on the show. I always love reading your articles, and I'd love for people to check it out themselves. Where can people find you, and what can they expect to read over there?
Diabettech.com.
Two T's.
Diabettech with two T's. Two T's. Diabettech with two T's. Yes, that's the one. And they can read all sorts of stuff over there. I talk about recent news from the diabetes world. There's a lot of my N=1 experimentation where I have a very clear approach to doing finger pricks and then checking the follow-up data points from CGMs to try and generate some data. I talk a lot about open source automated insulin delivery and the things we can do in that, including some of the stuff I've developed myself in relation to what I call Boost, which is a modification of the Android APS system to try and take meal times out of the equation and let it manage that itself. It's a paean to diabetes technology and the ups and downs of that. And my most recent point came out in relation to this, to the Medtronic and Libre, Abbott friendship and agreement, and what I think we might be able to expect coming out of that.
Well, Tim, thank you so much. I'm excited for everyone to check you out, and I'd love to have you on again sometime.
It's been a pleasure.
I want to hear what you think. Let me know in the comments your experience with MARD and CGM accuracy and your thoughts on the fact that there is no standard way of calculating it. Let us know in the comments on YouTube. And don't forget to sign up for our newsletter with the link in the show notes for future giveaways and diabetes tech news. I'm Justin, and I'll see you next week.